dramatic decline in the concentration of sperm per ejaculate anytime those ejaculations are occurring within a short period of time, say within 12 to 24 hours of one another. How often couples should have intercourse with ejaculation around the time of ovulation if the goal is to fertilize. Ejaculate is going to contain a certain concentration of sperm, but that within that ejaculate, some of the sperm will be older and less healthy, and some will be optimally mature, and some might even be a little bit immature, although there's a tendency for the immature sperm to not have yet exited the seminiferous tubules, gone into the epididymis and vas deferens. But given that the ejaculate contains sperm of varying ages and therefore varying quality, and given that with each successive ejaculation in a short period of time, there's going to be a decrease in the concentration of sperm per milliliter of semen, of ejaculate, we can make some good arguments as to how often couples should have intercourse with ejaculation around the time of ovulation if the goal is to fertilize. If ovulation occurs on, for instance, day 14 of a cycle, and here we're using the kind of standard average of 28 days of the cycle, but for some people with a 30-day cycle, that could be day 15, or with a shorter cycle, it could be day 12, for instance. But given a 28-day average cycle, let's say ovulation occurs on day 13 or on day 14, and typically would occur on day 14 of a 28-day cycle. Well, then, given how long sperm can survive inside of the woman, you might think that the optimal strategy would be to have as much intercourse with ejaculation in the 3 or 4 days leading up to ovulation. Hope that those sperm have swum as far as they possibly can and will encounter the egg just as soon as possible after it ovulates. It turns out that's not the optimal strategy. The optimal strategy is really to maximize the concentration of healthy sperm within each ejaculate and to really center that around the day of ovulation. So what this involves generally, what the typical recommendation is to abstain from intercourse with ejaculation about 2 or 3 days out from ovulation, and then on the day prior to ovulation and on the day of ovulation to essentially introduce as much semen and ejaculate into the reproductive pathway of the female as possible. Okay. Now, that's the general recommendation that the OBGYNs and the urologists that I spoke to gave, but you will also hear a different strategy. It's only slightly different, but the different strategy involves trying to maximize the concentration of healthy sperm within each ejaculate, with the understanding that with each subsequent ejaculation over about a 24-hour period, that there's going to be a dramatic reduction in the concentration of sperm. What that means is that if a couple, for instance, were to have intercourse with ejaculation many times on the day prior to ovulation, yes, that will introduce a lot of sperm into the reproductive pathway of the female, but what it means is that on the day of ovulation, if they were to have intercourse, the number of high-quality sperm that will be available to the egg will be greatly diminished. And if none of the sperm that were introduced in the day prior manage to fertilize that egg, well, then essentially chances are off that there will be fertilization, or they're greatly diminished. Rather, if they're having intercourse with ejaculation once or twice on the day prior to ovulation, and then a maximal number of times with ejaculation on the day of ovulation, that itself can maximize the probability of fertilization. So which strategy is optimal? Should couples have as much intercourse with ejaculation on the day prior to ovulation and on the day of ovulation? Or should they have intercourse on the day prior to ovulation, but not so frequently that it diminishes the concentration of sperm, and then allows for intercourse with the maximum number of ejaculations on the day of ovulation? You really hear it both ways. And what this really boils down to is, frankly, that nobody knows. And the reason nobody knows is that there's tremendous variation among males in terms of the absolute concentration of sperm per milliliter of ejaculate and the amount of sperm per milliliter of ejaculate within a given time frame. But what everyone agrees on is that a period of abstinence ranging from 48 to 72 hours prior to an ejaculation increases the concentration of high-quality sperm within that first ejaculation to occur after the abstinence period. Okay? So again, to reiterate, if one's goal is to fertilize the egg, you want to take into consideration that most often there's going to be a dramatic decline in the concentration of sperm per ejaculate anytime those ejaculations are occurring within a short period of time, say within 12 to 24 hours of one another. Now, all of this of course, also relates to the female biology and the extent to which the woman can precisely identify the day and timing of her ovulation. Some women feel as if, and indeed are very accurate at estimating their time of ovulation to within a couple of hours, or some women even report being able to feel their actual ovulation. Whether or not they are feeling the ovulation itself, the deployment of the egg or not, isn't clear. I certainly wouldn't know. I've never produced eggs, nor have I ovulated, and I'm certainly not going to contest the idea that women can do that. I mean, it makes sense that some people have a very keen so-called interoceptive awareness, an awareness of the sensory events within their body. And while, of course, the ovaries are not thought of as an organ that we want to be able to sense what's going on in there in terms of feel, there are sensory endings within the ovary. And so the notion that one could literally sense changes within their ovary, including the deployment of the egg, is not outside the bounds of reason. And in fact, could likely be the case.